A Russian drone attacked the residence of the President of Poland on the night of September 16th, striking the government quarter. The drone was recorded over the Shabe courtyard by security cameras. That is where President Karol Nawrocki lives with his family. Polish Prime Minister Tusk is furious. The drone was destroyed by the security service and 2 Belarusian citizens have been detained. Europe is in shock.
On September 15th to 16th, an air raid alert was declared in several Polish cities.
A drone attacked the Polish government on the night of September 16th.
All this is happening against the backdrop of Iskander missile deployments near the Polish border. For the first time, NATO is deploying troops on Polish territory. President Karol Nawrocki confirmed this and signed the decree for the first time. Europe stands on the brink of a major confrontation. The Kremlin is silent. I put on the cabinet in 8 to 10 minutes.
Yes.
And in St. Petersburg, trains were blown up. The night in Russia turned into chaos in the Leningrad region, one after another. The trips to diesel locomotives and tank cars converged. One of the drivers died. The investigator is checking the version of sabotage, and a bomb squad has arrived at the scene. At the same time, drones attacked the Karishi oil refinery, sparking a large-scale fire confirmed by satellite and NASA images. We will discuss all this with the well-known military analyst Roman Svytan. Roman Grigorievich, welcome.
Thank you. I wish you good health.
Roman Grigorievich, lately we have been attacking the Leningrad region of St. Petersburg. How do you assess the series of explosions near Petersburg?
There it blew up. Look, the smoke is rising.
Now, train derailments, those are acts of sabotage.
We need to look at which line it was, which trains derailed, and what they were carrying. So if that line is military, I think this work is not indifferent. To turn it off in the whole house. How do you do that? I'll turn it off. And the electricity? No need, nothing will happen. Or for example, if the trains were carrying fuel or ammunition, that's also not an indifferent job. Although the Russians have tens of thousands of kilometers of railways, in general, a derailment is also one of the side problems that comes with having so many tracks. There is a technical factor, a technological one, and there is a human factor. It could be different things. So at this stage, at this moment, it's hardly possible to confirm. Although, I'll say it again, lately we've been seeing a lot of work from our concerned citizens, as we call them, and we want to say a big thank you for what they do. The Russians' oil and gas facilities are burning and their trains are derailing right where it matters.
Roman Igorevich, for several months now, we've been talking about attacks on railway hubs in the Rostov region and near Moscow. And now this has smoothly shifted to the Leningrad region. How do you explain this?
We're gaining momentum. Railway hubs are one thing, but now it's also the Russian oil industry. Our security services have moved on to St. Petersburg. They previously carried out operations in Usluga and recently in Primorsk. The forces operating unmanned systems have reached Kiriashi. It's probably the second most significant oil refinery after Omsk, capable of processing up to 20 million tons per year. So right now they're trying to fully bring it online and build it up. I think they'll get there. It's just over 1,000 kilometers away. They'll reach it once they have enough forces and resources. This direction has started to develop, meaning work is now moving northward. Previously, most of our operations were in the east and northeast, but now they're heading north as well. They've moved on to St. Petersburg. Why St. Petersburg specifically? Because that's the traffic going through St. Petersburg, through the St. Petersburg ports, Ust-Luga and Primorsk. It's the traffic of oil, the traffic of products, especially light oil products, which directly bring a large amount of money into the Russian economy and into the pockets of all sorts of people like Putin and so on. That's what it's all about. Especially Kiriashi. It's practically considered Putin's own refinery, meaning he personally gets his cut there, though that cut is, of course, much more substantial. So it's about working on the deep rear areas of Russia. Well, for us, that's the deep rear. I mean, obviously, Russia stretches up to 7,000 kilometers beyond the Urals, but for us, the deep rear means reaching St. Petersburg, the Kola Peninsula, the Urals, Uralvagon Zavod, gradually, step by step, this task is being accomplished. Railway junctions are fundamentally very important for us to consider, for example, in order to stop their operations, to disrupt the ongoing flow of transfers, most especially the critical economic transfers. That is, we're talking not only about military cargo, but also everything that allows the Russian military economy to maintain the offensive potential of the Russian army at a certain level. This is very important for us. Russia is a resource-based country. How do you defeat a resource-based country? Destroy its resources. Well, at least as much as possible, and even then, the mechanisms for obtaining foreign currency for these resources are somehow still being used at various levels. It's not about the factories that are operating now, it's not about the transfers, but about the transfer itself. Gas processing, not the quiet Russian kind. This is Russian metallurgy. This even includes Russian nuclear energy, especially the extraction sectors, which receive certain funds from the same Rosatom. So there are many such mechanisms, and we can defeat them. At the moment, we have the capability to do so. We have certain opportunities which we are discussing right now. At this point, we can reach almost the entire European part of the Russian Federation. Let's wait for those announcements that our authorities have been making over the past few years. Let's wait for them to actually be put into action. Of course, they say promises are kept after 3 years, but it's already the third year, so I think it's about time. If the missiles really do reach even further, at least 2 to 2.5 thousand kilometers, then we'll reach the Urals. And there's something there too.
Roman Levich, as always, you're right, because the Karechki oil refinery is one of the largest in Russia, capable of processing about 20 million tons of oil per year. And already today, there are huge lines at gas stations in St. Petersburg and the region, as everyone is reporting a massive rush and everyone says there's no gasoline. There's a problem with petroleum products. Is this the result we wanted to achieve, Roman Grigorievich?
No, it's the opposite result. We wanted to stop the activity by striking the oil refineries. If there's still someone moving around in St. Petersburg, if there's still activity, then we haven't finished the job yet. I think we've finished the job.
Also, as news, the Free System struck the Novoufimsky oil refinery in Ufa. This was reported by Russian Telegram channels. 1,400 kilometers from the border with Ukraine, drones struck the Novoufimsky oil refinery in Ufa. A fire broke out on the territory of the Bashneft Naval oil refining plant, 1,400 kilometers from the border with Ukraine. Roman Grigorievich, what do you think about this news? 1,400 kilometers.
We need to clarify something here. Most likely the NSB did the job. Most likely it was the main reconnaissance directorate that carried it out. As for the Free Systems forces, mainly they have the AN 196, which are fierce. They have the 14th BPAC, the 14th Regiment of Free Aviation Complexes. They mostly operate with the fierce ones. The fierce ones can't reach that far. But at that range, it's the GUR drones that come in. You could say the planes have been modified. Drones have been made from planes. They can take on board about a 250 kilogram aviation bomb, FAB 250. They've already brought them to this state. And that's exactly the work being done in Bashkortostan and Tatarstan. These are ranges of over 1,000 kilometers. That's exactly the kind of job these Aeroprac drones are used for. Some types of Aeroprac drones. There are about a dozen different mechanisms there. In Ugur, there is an entire site, most likely because there are always aviators working there who convert light aircraft into drones, which then go out and strike Russian military targets at such distances. Therefore, it can be said that at this point, especially after the involvement of the main intelligence directorate in the destruction of Russian oil facilities, the Ukrainian defense forces as a whole, with all their special services, are now working to destroy the Russian economy by targeting oil refineries, which in the end could lead to, and that is the objective, to bring about the collapse of the Russian Federation. Such a possibility has indeed been set as a goal. The main intelligence directorate, together with the Security Service of Ukraine, the Special Operations Forces, the Unmanned Systems Forces, and the Foreign Intelligence Service are all involved. Even our Navy is now participating in carrying out such tasks. For example, they struck Feodosia. Feodosia has been burning for the second day at the very least. So this is exactly the kind of work that, among others, the Navy is involved in. In other words, we can say that the entire defense forces of Ukraine have now reconnected and relaunched the mechanism for these strikes. We have the means to strike, and it's clear that we have the means. There are already enough drones with large warheads. 250 kilograms for a drone is a serious payload. So This is an aerial bomb that was carried over 1,000 kilometers and struck a military target, and Russian oil refineries are all considered military targets because A, they serve Russia's military economy, and B, they produce fuel for the Russian army. So for us, this is an entirely legitimate military target.
Roman Igorovich, you mentioned the times of the occupied Crimea. A communications hub of the Russian Black Sea Fleet has been destroyed in Crimea. Naval units struck the communications hub of the Russian Black Sea Fleet in the occupied Sevastopol. This was reported by the General Staff. You also mentioned the explosions in Feodosia. Let's discuss that.
This is precisely the involvement of the naval forces. By and large, the liberation of Crimea should be directed from our Navy headquarters. Of course, we don't have any serious ships, but we do have enough strike capabilities to liberate Crimea, even without ground operations. Air and naval operations. From the air, that's drones, missiles, and aviation. At sea, that's surface and underwater drones, plus part of the so-called Mosquito fleet. There needs to be a certain level of coordination. This is the optimal option. The Navy headquarters should carry out this task, and they are directly involved in it. In addition to the fact that for at least the past month and a half, our special services, QR, SBU, and also the drone forces have been targeting Russian radars, mainly in Crimea. The naval forces have already started working on communication mechanisms, just as we're talking about it now, plus the oil depots in the same Feodosia. So this comprehensive approach to striking military targets in our Crimea could lead to the start of a real military operation and long-range precision strikes. Let me repeat once again, this is a naval aviation campaign. As for a ground operation, at the moment, we are not ready for that. But when it comes to aviation, missile, and naval strikes, we definitely can. That's exactly what we're talking about right now.
Guys, regarding the Iskander strikes in the Kaliningrad region, what happened? Russia is announcing the deployment of Iskanders in the Kaliningrad region. So this poses a certain threat to Poland and possibly to the Baltic states as well. That's the issue. And for the first time, air raid sirens sounded in several Polish cities in recent days. For the first time in Poland, President Karol Nawrocki made the decision, as I understand it, to change the legislative framework in order to allow NATO troops to be stationed on Polish territory. How do you assess these events from a geopolitical and military perspective?
Geopolitically, it's Putin's attempt to scare someone, and from a military standpoint, it's about designating a target. The number of targets in the Kaliningrad region of the Russian Federation, which is the Kaliningrad exclave, has increased. Any unplanned launch of an Iskander, any unplanned incident after a hangover on a Monday, when someone presses the red button instead of the green one, and you can basically write off Kaliningrad as a Russian exclave. It will immediately go back either to Poland, Lithuania, or Germany, depending on who gets there first and which flag is raised. They are still arguing about it, whether it's Königsberg or Krolewiec, Polish or Lithuanian. The name there is quite interesting. In other words, this particular city, and in fact, this entire enclave will, in the fullness of time, eventually return to what is properly referred to as the ancestral land of a specific people, with the important clarification that this land is most definitely not and will not become Russian. So in essence, President Putin is simply increasing the number of these kinds of precedents for such a rapid reversal, because this is being viewed purely from a military point of view. Even if 1, 2, or 10 Iskanders are launched, it won't cause a catastrophic problem in Europe. We've already taken on hundreds of them ourselves. We're fighting, and we will continue to fight. So the Kaliningrad exclave of the Russian Federation will cease to exist, which is why, as I understand it, Putin is most likely trying to return this region of Russia back to its original German lands at this point.
Roman Igorovich, do you think that this situation happening in Poland and in Romania as well, by the way, because drones were taking off again, was somehow connected to the fact that Karol Nawrocki adopted a strategy allowing for the introduction and calculation onto Polish territory? These are serious signals of a certain escalation. In your opinion, from a military standpoint, first and foremost, what do you make of these actions?
Well, at the very least, it's an attempt to ensure the security of Europe's eastern border. In other words, it's a very competent, very correct, albeit belated attempt, I would say. These issues should have been addressed a bit earlier. It's already clear, especially after Putin's meeting, after his rendezvous with Xi Jinping, that Putin once again got a magic kick in the backside, just like in 2022. Xi Jinping sent him to bite Europe, he bit Ukraine, and now he's been directly sent to bite Europe further. He's bitten Tuj, Poland, and Romania. And before that, by the way, there was also the incident with the Mi-8 flying into Estonia. So, in other words, the escalation is coming from Russia, from both Russia and China, that is from over there, and it just needs to be answered. And until there is a serious response, as we discussed before, Putin is expecting a slap in the face, but that slap needs to be delivered to him, a kick straight to the face. That's when it will finally reach whatever scraps of brain he still has left. He'll feel that blow. But as long as you keep coddling him, telling fairy tales about how we supposedly didn't notice something, summoning ambassadors, they'll just keep saying, it wasn't me, I had nothing to do with it. But we understood this perfectly well. This kind of blow is similar to when, back in the day, Erdogan shot down a Russian plane that had entered Turkish airspace for just a second and a half. That's the kind of strike I'm talking about. It would put him in his place in 3 seconds. It just needs to be delivered. There's no question about delivering it. We can help. Just give us the go-ahead. After any incursion, say, of drones like that into Poland, if on the very next day, for example, the Izhevsk or Alabis factories and the assembly lines for those drones had been destroyed, basically nothing would be flying anymore. We just need to get there. Our drones that make it there can go the distance. Well, yes, they can then, 1,500 kilometers, those Aeroprac drones can cover that distance. They can carry a 100 kilogram or even a 250 kilogram aviation bomb, but that's not enough. To destroy a large area target, you need to use missiles, either ballistic or cruise missiles, like Tomahawks. So at the moment, Tomahawks are still somehow able to reach there, maybe some extended range JASSMs, although it's unlikely we'll get those right away. There are some so-called ERs that can go over 1,000 kilometers, but realistically, it's only Tomahawks or ballistic missiles, but there are no ballistic missiles in Europe. So that leaves only one option, which is the transfer of Tomahawks. Currently, Tomahawk launches have been restored either ship-based, since it's primarily a sea-launched missile, or submarine-based. But there is a good launcher. Now, for example, there are even ground-based ones. They've made Typhoons, meaning a launcher, for instance, for Tomahawks. Well, we've already talked about this missile more than once with you. It's about time, so to speak. And until Europe makes a decision, well, only together with the Americans, you need to know, no decisions will be made, and these provocations will continue, meaning they will keep happening, including the destruction of all Russian drones in Polish airspace. So, for example, they destroyed roughly 20 drones. Well, it doesn't really affect Russia much, but tomorrow they'll send 220 drones. The Poles will basically be using up their own anti-missile reserves to shoot them down. But what needs to be destroyed are the factories where large-scale assembly takes place. Moreover, in Russia, in Laboga, and in Izhevsk. And there are also factories producing component units in China. There, as everywhere, factories are manufacturing all these control systems, servos, and so on and so forth for the Garan drones. That's why the issue needs to be addressed in a fundamental way. So far, there is no such solution. We're waiting will help. Help with what?
Yes, Roman Ivanovich, you are absolutely right. There should have been a symmetrical response regarding the assembly sites of these drones on Russian territory. But when I talk to economists, even among our own people, they all say that Europe, or rather the countries, will never go for this because they are afraid of nuclear escalation. In other words, as soon as they strike Russian territory, they believe that Putin will launch some kind of nuclear attack. So this illusion still exists in their minds. Considering that Ukraine is constantly striking Russia, there has been no nuclear attack. But if they do strike, they believe there will be some sort of tactical nuclear strike, so to speak.
Yeah, that's just a simple excuse. I mean, there's some other reason, but yes, to justify themselves, they say, Lord, well, Putin has a nuclear club. Well, he does have that nuclear club, but he's not going to use it, especially not on Europe. The thing is, when it comes to Putin from a nuclear standpoint, from this nucleotide perspective, why does he have dozens of nuclear power plants? Dozens of nuclear power plants, most are on the European part of Russia. Just imagine, there are more than a dozen Chernobyls there. That is, if someone were to reach a nuclear power plant, blow it up, and leave it for tens of thousands of years, the half-life period of, by the way, weapons-grade plutonium, which some of these reactors run on. So basically like Chernobyls. Well, that would mean putting a permanent cross on Russia, as they say, without even a nuclear strike, meaning you wouldn't even need to retaliate with anything. Why hasn't Putin carried out a nuclear strike on Ukraine, and why won't he? He understands perfectly well that we would just turn about 12.5 of their nuclear power plants into Chernobyls. and then it would be impossible to live there. We've talked about this before, but ask any good physicist. The half-life, for example, of strontium or cesium is between 30 and 70 years, one or the other. The half-life of weapons-grade plutonium is 24,000 years. The half-life of uranium-235 and uranium-238, 700 million years and 4.5 billion years. But then the outcry will be against Russia. The sun will destroy the Earth faster than it will be possible to live on the European part of Russian territory. Russians may not be fools. Well, some are, but they still have an animal instinct for self-preservation. They haven't done it after all. Just as they didn't strike Ukraine, they won't strike Europe either because it's nuclear. And now, in fact, Xi Jinping has reined Putin in a bit, most likely because his rhetoric changed a lot after his trip to Xi. And he has completely removed the nuclear topic from his rhetoric. At this point, the most he can threaten Europe with is this. With such strikes and various levels of aerial weapons, again, these are just threats. In other words, these are threats that need to be responded to immediately so that in the end, cruise missiles and Iskanders don't start flying over Europe, and it's better to hit Putin in the teeth right away as soon as he starts sending the first drones. So far, this hasn't happened. I'll say it again. Are the Europeans afraid? No problem. Give them to us. That is, we are no longer afraid of anything in this life. Not the devil, not Lada, not anything at all. So just let us handle it ourselves, no problem. And there won't be any Labogi or Zhevskaya or anything flying to Europe. If necessary, we can strike Leningrad with those same Iskanders. Maybe not just one Iskander anymore, but here the rules are different.
Roman Egorovich Radosław Sikorski, the Deputy Prime Minister of Poland, as usual, made a statement. He voiced it at first and then said it was just his personal opinion, as they say, rhetoric that doesn't carry any consequences. So, what did he say? That Europe is considering the Sky Shield initiative to shoot down Russian missiles over Ukraine. After making this statement, he clarified, but that's just my personal opinion. So once again, it's one step forward and 10 steps back. Right away, drunk Medvedev, came out with his own statement saying that if NATO countries shoot down Russian drones over Ukraine, it would mean war between the alliance and the Russian Federation. So here's the question. Do you think, Roman Egorovich, that in principle the Sky Shield procedure is possible, meaning NATO countries shooting down Russian missiles and drones over Ukrainian territory? Or is this just another round of European rhetoric that, as always, will never be implemented?
Well, anyone who listens to Medvedev doesn't respect themselves. Everyone understands that by now. Sometimes it's true. He voices some of the Kremlin's wishes or scare tactics, but for him, or rather, that's exactly how he's used, as a talking head, nothing more than that. Any military target that could even theoretically cause harm to a country should be destroyed wherever possible. Why? Because once the harm is done, you can't bring lives back. Well, it's a good thing those Russian drones came in as decoys, but what if they had come in armed? And then, let's say the Poles had to bury several people. Afterwards, it's just like waving your fists after the fight is over. You can't bring people back. That's why you need to be prepared and destroy any objects that could pose a threat to you, ideally right at the launch, or even better, before they launch. That's why I say it's best to destroy them in Labog and Izhevsk, or even better in China, before they even start moving at all. That's why such actions are appropriate, but of course the same logic applies. But as for readiness, let's say, of countries to carry out this kind of task, at the moment it's certainly problematic as I see it. Yes, some European leaders express such willingness, but it's not really readiness, as you correctly point out. It's just their opinion. By the time they actually become ready, Russian tanks could have already rolled across half of Europe. So this is a big problem, which is why we simply need to offer our help here, meaning offer our airspace, propose certain mechanisms for how this can be done, after all, over our territory. There are many such mechanisms, and even if the Europeans want or don't want the Russians to latch onto them, these mechanisms can be devised. Our bases, someone else's bases, our aircraft put on combat duty with us, planes with pilots who, for example, are assigned to carry out certain tasks within these mechanisms. There are a lot of options. The main thing is to show off less. That's already a problem in politics. In politics, people like to show off. That is, to claim any positive developments for themselves and somehow avoid the negative ones. If you set a purely military objective, it is achievable and it can be accomplished without any informational support. So let's finally rely on that and get the job done. We can do it too. Of course, it's hard for us to shut up all our politicians in Russia who will be jumping out of their skin to claim that we finally brought NATO troops onto our territory. But in reality, if the military takes charge of this, shuts up the politicians or locks up the Russians, sews them up, tapes them up, and pours concrete over them, then after that, such tasks can be carried out covertly. The main objective will be accomplished. Not a single aerial target will be able to enter European territory or the European Northwest anymore.
Roman Nikolaevich, could you please tell us what the current situation is in Kupansk, where the Russians made their way through the pipes? These images have probably already been seen by the whole world.
These images need to be seen by Syrskyi. Specifically, General Syrskyi needs to see these images and answer why these pipes still even exist to this day. In other words, what the commander-in-chief should have done right away is destroy those pipes. If he's afraid himself, I don't know, maybe he can't do it. Maybe his hands aren't growing from the right place, or his brain just isn't working. But in the end, just give the task to the Donetsk metal workers. They'll dismantle those pipes overnight. They'll even make it to Moscow, and Muscovites won't even know about it. But those pipes will already be dismantled and sold for scrap metal. We have specialists who hundreds of times have dismantled dozens of kilometers of underground pipes right under everyone's noses, pulled them out, buried the ground again, and claimed there was never anything there. At least that's how it went. Some prosecutors would later write up the reports. Nobody ever saw those pipes. They were supposedly there since the days of Tsar Pank. So the task just needed to be set because the question is very specific. Every problem has a first name, last name, and patronymic. The problem with these pipes just sitting there, that's Syrskyi and so on. Why did the commander-in-chief have to specifically set this task? Why didn't he give the order to destroy them? That's a question for him and for whoever didn't let him do it. So whether it was some little green man in his head or in reality, that's a big question. Let them sort it out themselves with these little green men who didn't allow the destruction of the pipe in Sudzha through which the Russians passed. We lost lives because of this. And not only did we lose territory and positions, but we lost the lives of our people because of it. It's the same quiet situation in Kupiansk. Why is there still a functioning pipeline there through which the Russians can pass? There shouldn't be any. No pipelines, no railways. Why is the pipeline, the ammonia pipeline, still running through Kupiansk? No one knows that either, but the ammonia pipeline still runs through Kupiansk and further west toward Odessa, still operating to this day. So this is a question not only for Syrskyi. There are further questions beyond Syrskyi to those little green men. Figure out who created the conditions that allowed all these mechanisms at a profiteering level to remain intact and safe, which the Russians now use for their movements. So our situation in Kupiansk, no matter what the general staff says, is really not a happy one. Believe me, not happy at all, because the Russians are putting quite serious pressure on Kupiansk. Their objective is to move toward Lyman and then further on to Sloviansk. That is, this Kupiansk-Sloviansk area is very important to the Russians, which is why they are using every opportunity our little green men give them, including Syrskyi, to take up positions. And the little green men have been protecting Russian oil refineries for half a year, shielding them from strikes together with Syrskyi, the most interesting part. Why? Because General Golovkov most likely participated in providing this security. Now, the Russian army has enough fuel to carry out the second wave of the summer military campaign to put pressure on that same Kupiansk. So once again, we come back to whom? To Syrskyi and to those little green men, either behind him or in his head. In the end, let them sort it out themselves. But there are things that are too simple, not entirely clear to the whole society, at least to those who are following this situation.
Dear audience, please like this video. Leave a few kind words in the comments to support our tandem with Roman Grigorievich and the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Be sure to share your thoughts about this war situation in general and, of course, about the Iskanders in Kaliningrad. This is the very important and well-known military analyst Roman Svyatan. Roman Grigorievich, thank you, and as always, see you again later this week. Thank you very much.
Goodbye. So